As we begin, we're going to actually continue. We're working through the Gospel of Mark. And if you say, Scott, I haven't been here as we've gone through this, don't worry, my sermons stand alone, but we have been methodically moving through since January. And since January, we've gotten all the way up to where we are starting chapter 6. So we are moving at record pace. But here we are, we're in Mark chapter 6, and if you have your Bibles, I want you to go ahead and turn them open. If you want to use that blue pew Bible in the back of your pews, it's going to be on page 711. If you want to go ahead and turn there, you can. We're going to begin by reading this passage. Mark chapter 6, starting in verse 1, it says this. Jesus left there and went to his hometown, accompanied by his disciples. When the Sabbath came, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were amazed. Where did this man get these things, they asked. What's this wisdom that has been given him, that he even does miracles? Isn't this the carpenter? Isn't this Mary's son and the brother of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon? Aren't his sisters here with us? And they took offense at him. Jesus said to them, only in his hometown, among his relatives, and in his own house is a prophet without honor. He could not do any miracles there except lay his hands on a few sick people and heal them. And he was amazed at their lack of faith. And so as we begin this sermon's really going to take part in two separate parts. This first part, I want to talk a little bit about the geography. I think it's important that we understand where things are located and what's going on. And so here is a map. You have the Sea of Galilee. That's that big blue area. And there is a red line at the very top of the Sea of Galilee. And underlined is the town of Capernaum. Why would I underline the town of Capernaum? Because this is really the home base of Jesus during his 3-year ministry. So much stuff takes place in and around Capernaum. This is where he would come back and he would stay and then go back out somewhere else. And so this is kind of that base in the Gospel of Mark that we've looked at so far. Capernaum has really been the first 5 chapters of this book, and we're going to get back to Capernaum here in a little bit. But we have this little bit of a break where Jesus leaves Capernaum and he goes to his hometown of Nazareth. Lower left-hand corner, underlined in red, is Nazareth. And this is the town, not where he was born, because we all know he was born in Bethlehem. But as his parents returned after fleeing to Egypt, they came and they settled in Nazareth. And what was Nazareth like in the first century? Today, there's like 30,000 people that live in Nazareth. But what did it look like 2,000 years ago when Jesus would have been raised in that area? Well, for those that actually care, Nazareth took up about a 60-acre lot. That's the whole town is 60 acres. And there was about 400 people that lived there. Some estimates go as low as 200 people, but up to 400 people. Somewhere in that range is how many people lived there. And this was a hilly, rocky community. I don't know if you can see on this map that rugged terrain that Nazareth is set in. I don't know if you can see that or not, but it's a really rugged, rocky, hilly location. And they had agriculture. That was their main source. That was their main product. But it wasn't great agriculture. They had animals, but they didn't grow very large because of where they were. They had some crops, but they didn't grow very large because they were all in this rocky, hard soil. In the town of Nazareth, there was no paved streets. There was no palaces, as you would see in so many of the towns of the day. And they only had one bathhouse that was used primarily for Jewish ritual cleansings. And so this is not a prosperous area that Jesus was raised in his formative years, and there's not very many people that live there. But what makes Nazareth interesting is this. Just about 50 minutes north of Nazareth, if you was to walk, about 50 minutes north, there was a large town called Sepphoris. Now, Sepphoris, 50 minutes from Nazareth, it was built by Herod Antipas, which is one of the sons of Herod the Great. It was the capital of Galilee until about 20 AD. And so for those formative years of Jesus' life, this was the capital of that area. And about 30,000 people lived there. And there was palaces, there was bathhouses, there was all of these things that you think of when you imagine Greco-Roman life. All those things existed just 50 minutes away. While it would be an imperfect example, you could think a little bit about Lathrop, about 50 minutes from Kansas City, but are those cultures the same? No. There's a vast difference between rural Lathrop and urban Kansas City, just as Jesus would see in his day as well. Where he grew up was nothing compared to that town just 50 minutes away. Now, in this passage, Jesus is called a teknon. That's what they translated as carpenter. But that's the Greek word used as teknon, and the reason that I want to talk a little bit about that is because not only do I love the Greek language, and I think you ought to know a little bit about it, but because I think in this context it's really important to understand. And if you're not new, or if you are newer to us and you haven't been here a lot, don't worry, I don't get into the Greek every single week. Okay, just whenever I think there's a real point we need to think about. So when we hear that word carpenter, in today's world, we think of that guy that's out there working with all the wood, framing up houses, doing things like that. Maybe building dog houses, things like that. That's the carpenter. But in the ancient world, this word, teknon, had a much broader meaning. But before we get there, did you know we get the word architect from teknon? All we do is add arch to the beginning, which means master or first or head is arch or arch. And then, so you have the head carpenter is architecture. But the reason I bring this up is because this word has such a broader meaning than carpenter of what we think of. Really, it just means a builder. He could be a stonemason. He could be that general contractor. And the reason I bring this up is because I've already described the area that Jesus lived in Nazareth. He was not there building massive homes with all of this wood. But guess what? They could dig big cisterns and they could cut things out of all that stone that they had. And they could make stuff out of that stone. And so when we think of Jesus as a carpenter, we need to ignore our general thought of what a carpenter is and realize he probably did a lot more with stone than he did wood. Now, he probably dealt with wood. He probably made, things to harness up oxen and things like that, because that would have all been part of his task as well. But when we think of carpenter, let us think more general contractor, builder, stonemason. In fact, that's what architect actually means, is head builder. That's what architect means, head builder. And that makes more sense to us. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of that as we were talking about Jesus and where he was living. But also what makes this interesting, and there is absolutely no evidence to what I'm about to say, but Sephora built all these palaces and all these bathhouses, and Herod Antipas wanted all this stuff, and so he used all these contractors from the local area. Just 50 miles away, or 50 minutes away, guess what? Nazareth would have been one of those local areas where he would have drawn people from. It's possible that Joseph and Jesus went up there and actually helped build some of that city. Again, no evidence. Don't get me wrong. But as we look at Mark chapter 6, okay, wake up, everybody. If you didn't care about what I just said, now wake up and the real sermon's going to begin. So when we get to Mark chapter 6, verses 1 through 6, what is the real significance of this passage? This is the very first time in the Gospel of Mark that Jesus was opposed by the common man. Okay? The common man is now opposing Jesus. Before, it was only the religious elite. Before this, the common people loved Jesus. They flocked to Jesus. They heard his teachings at Capernaum, and they loved it, and they took it in. And because of the faith in Capernaum, miracle after miracle was performed. And yet you get here to Nazareth, and all those people that knew Jesus as a child, and he was raised in that town, they opposed him. They were frustrated with him. They didn't like him very much. But it wasn't the message that he was speaking that they rejected. What wisdom is this that he's getting? Where did he get this wisdom from? They're not rejecting the message there in Nazareth. They were rejecting the messenger. They was rejecting Jesus himself. Now, this is actually a reversal from the religious elites. They rejected the message. Jesus, what you're saying is wrong. It can't possibly be true. But here, they're rejecting the messenger. What you're saying sounds fine, but I know you. As we think of this, and we hear them say, isn't this the carpenter? They knew Jesus was raised and he became a carpenter. They knew he didn't spend years and years in synagogue school learning to be a rabbi. And yet he goes away and for just a short time and he comes back, and no longer is he a carpenter. He's now a rabbi that has this following of disciples with him. And they say, this can't be. He's a carpenter. He's not a rabbi. Isn't this Mary's son? Now, when we read that, isn't this Mary's son? Most of us probably don't think 2 seconds about that statement. But we should. Because one, this means most likely Joseph was dead. Okay? That's not the important part to me, though. Even if Joseph was dead at this time, in Jewish society, of which Nazareth was like 99.9% Jewish, in Jewish society and culture, they would still talk of Jesus as Joseph's son. Here's that woman who was pregnant before she even got married. And this son is illegitimately conceived. How could he possibly be a rabbi that we should listen to? So when we read that, let's not gloss over the fact that they picked out Mary and said, "Isn't this Mary's son?" Let's remember, Mary probably didn't have a great life, because this would always be brought back up, that she got pregnant and she had a child before she even got married to Joseph. It wouldn't have been a secret in Nazareth. There's 200, 400 people there. There's not hardly a secret in Lathrop, and there's 2,000 of us. I was talking to Alexa last night, doesn't matter about what, and she goes, "Well, the whole town's going to know about it." And I say, "Well, how you know? We're up here in Hubbard Place." She goes, "It's a small town. They know everything." Oh, how quickly we learn. She's only in 8th grade. And so here it is. They are rejecting Jesus, the person. I was thinking about this a little bit. Now, this would almost be like you have somebody that talks a lot and doesn't think about what they say, okay? Let's just imagine there's somebody like that. And the first thing that comes to their brain, it comes out of their mouth, okay? And so they go away for maybe 3 or 4 months. And they come back, and you ask them a question. And Richard goes, "Well, let's think on this a little bit before I say something. Let me see if let's ponder on this and reflect on this before I say something." We go, "Wait a second, you've never done this before." You know, because we can't get through that change that may have happened. And because I know Richard gets picked on a lot, it almost be like one day Gary coming in with a smile on his face and he's whistling. It's like, where's the grumpy old man that we know and love? Got them both. It'd almost be like me coming in one day and I tell Alexa, "Make sure my microphone's on because I'm going to be quiet and reflective today." Right? And so here's Jesus. They know him. They know him as a carpenter. They know who he is. And guess what? They might even remember back to when Jesus was just 12 years old. This is that kid that caused all the problems for his mom and dad when they went on that pilgrimage to Jerusalem. And when they came back, he stayed in Jerusalem, and it caused them all that anxiety that they had to turn back and go try to find their 12-year-old child. That kid never cared about his parents. And so they have all these preconceived notions, and so they just can't fathom that Jesus would have this perfect wisdom from God. They can't fathom that he is working miracles, and guess what? Maybe some of them are in fact just jealous. Why would God choose him and not my son? Why would God choose him to do these things? Because of all these things I just said, why him and not my child? And so you have all this stuff going on in this small town. And the problem is they thought they knew who this Jesus of Nazareth was. They thought they knew him. But they missed it. They didn't. Which leads me to this question. Have you missed it also? Have you missed who this Jesus of Nazareth really is? And I really think of things like this. You just know Jesus from what you heard in the outside of the church. Maybe you weren't raised in church, and all you get is the news stories. You get all the negatives that you hear on YouTube. You get all the negatives you hear from around. Maybe you see positive pictures of Jesus and God in certain media. Now, I'm not one that watches The Simpsons, but I am told when The Simpsons reference God, it's actually a very high version of God. I don't know that to be true. I don't watch The Simpsons. That has never compelled me to go find out, but that's what I've heard. You know, so maybe you do have some of this mixed bag, but then you have George Burns in My God, the movie My God, and he's just a bumbling idiot. Oh, yeah, I made the ostrich wrong. I made the avocado pit too big. So what version of God are you getting if all you're getting is from the media outside? That's the question. But maybe that's the Jesus that you know, but maybe you're missing it because that's not the picture of the true Jesus. Maybe you were born and raised in church. Now this is the one that gets me to the core. Maybe you were born and raised in the church, and you get older, and you go, well, I already know who Jesus is from all those children's stories that I heard. I know who God is. I know that story of Noah and about the rainbow and about the flood. I know that because of the stories I heard as a child. Well, now you're 30 years old, and maybe there's something else in here about that story you missed because you were learning it as a child and haven't been looking at it as an adult. And I hear this. Maybe you guys don't because we're all in different professions. I hear this a lot. People will tell me, yeah, I left the church, but now I've had kids. Now I want my kids to learn about it, and so I'll bring them to church or whatever because I still want them to learn about it, but I've kind of outgrown it. They don't use those words, but that's the idea. I don't need it for me, but I want my child to learn about it. Maybe you're missing it. Just a little. Now, I'll be the first to tell you, I'd rather have them born and raised in the church than the alternative. The statistics bear it out. But what about that child that was born and raised in the church? And they still come to church, but they've never been baptized. They've never taken on the profession of faith themselves, but they have heard over and over that they are still part of the church. We talk about our children as if they are part of this local church, which they are in one sense, but in another they are not. They have not accepted Christ for their own. And what is the true union with the church? It is being a part of that church and being united with Christ. And you know what that visible union with Christ is? It's being baptized. You are buried with Christ in baptism. You are raised in newness of life. But they just know it as the community. They know it as the people they've always been around. And they don't even mind coming to church and helping out because they view it simply as an organization and not as a relationship with God. Another way you can miss it is where you focus your time in your relationship. Head versus heart. You can learn a lot of theology. You can learn a lot of things about God and about Jesus and about the Holy Spirit and about the church. I would love to talk about ecclesiology and eschatology and Christology and all those other ologies with you. Okay, I don't mind doing it. It's where I would probably lean in this idea. But just because you have knowledge doesn't mean you have that heart relationship with God. Maybe you're missing it. True story. Manhattan Christian College, when I was there, they had a professor of theology that resigned while I was there. Now, this professor of theology had been in churches as Sunday school teachers. He's been teaching in colleges. He has been elders. He's been an elder in churches. And he resigned, saying, there's no way I can believe in God. I have learned too much. It's not true. He resigned. He said, I can't do it anymore. All he was focused on was all that head knowledge and philosophy and things like that. And you know, I can say this and someone might say, well, that's why you don't go to seminary. I've heard it. But there was no heart connection. Maybe he missed it. But the same can be true on the polar opposite end. I have a relationship with Jesus. I have a relationship with God. I don't ever read my Bible, but he's there walking alongside me. I know he is. I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. Don't ask me what it says in this book, but I'm spiritual. I'm going to heaven because I'm a good person. Well, I don't know anything about the Bible, but I know I have a relationship with Jesus. Do you? Or are you missing it? Have you created a Jesus in your own mind that is not the biblical Jesus? If you have, you missed it. And so I just pray each and every one of us really evaluate our relationship with God and with Jesus. Do we truly know Jesus? Or do we just think we do? Let us pray. Lord God, we praise you and we thank you. Lord God, this week, each and every day, let us take a moment and evaluate our relationship with you. Let us evaluate who you are, and do we know you? And do we know the real you or the you that we made up? The you that we've seen in media? The you that we've seen in the world and we've just kind of created a picture of you that's not biblical? That all we're doing maybe is focusing on that theology and that head knowledge, and we're never allowing it to penetrate our hearts to have that relationship with you. Each and every day, let us evaluate the Jesus that you are, not the Jesus we think you are. And we'll only know that through your word and through a relationship with you. In Christ we pray. Amen.